Welcome back to The Turnaround Artists, a podcast about turning things around when they don't go our way. This podcast was inspired by the recent happy turnarounds of its creators, Brian McFarland and me, Marisa Mitchell. Brian launched a new podcast that's more professional in scope called Owning the Goal, which is designed to help listeners achieve sales and business success. So I'll be doing more of the hosting here at The Turnaround Artists. On this show, we've done a few episodes about divorce, which often entails pain and struggle followed by some sort of turnaround. Today, we're talking to a relationship expert who helps couples avoid this option of last resort. Debbie Cottle is a licensed therapist and marriage coach, as well as an author and public speaker with over 30 years of working with relationship-challenged adults. She is a turnaround artist, helping couples who have grown apart to reconnect and create the marriage of their dreams. She was recently interviewed on Owning the Goal, and I'm thrilled she can join us today. Debbie, welcome to the show.
Thanks, Marisa. It's a pleasure to be here.
So let's start with what led you to this line of work to focus on relationship recovery and transformation.
I don't know if I think I was destined to do this, Marisa. I'm a romantic, and I'm somebody who loves happy endings. And I always seem to have people gravitate towards me, even as a kid, to, open up to me and talk to me, even though I had no idea what to say to them. So I set out to be a teacher, but between the summer of my senior year at college, I got on the counseling path, and I've never looked back. So I think it's just always been who I am. I just had to realize it.
Yeah, that's pretty young, junior and senior year in college.
Yeah.
How did you get your start?
You mean as far as
in therapy, in counseling? Yeah.
Yeah. So to be a licensed counselor, you have to have a master's degree. So I graduated at 22 from college. I went right into grad school, and I graduated my master's at 25, and got my first job working in a youth and adolescent center in Texas. And that was a very, very eye-opening experience. And I did a lot of the sort of government-funded agency work for a little while. And then I moved into the community college world. And I was there for 7 or 8 years, working with college students as a counselor, but also, you wear a lot of hats when you work at a community college. So I taught classes and I did academic advising along with counseling, but I always wanted to be in private practice. I always had wanted to own my own business. So I finally took the plunge. I gave a year's notice at the college I was working at in 2004. I gave them a year's notice. There's good things and bad things about that. Knowing for a whole year that you're not going to be working with them anymore. And in that year, I was starting to offer counseling at night after work. I found a really affordable place in town that I could rent. And, back in this day, back then in 2005, you just took out an ad in the yellow pages and got some business, cheap business cards and put up some flyers around town. And, I started getting a few calls. So my goal was that in that year, first of all, I gave notice because I wanted the accountability, like, you're doing this, Debbie, you've told everybody, so now you have to do it. But I started seeing clients part-time over that course of that year so that I could transition easier into private practice.
Okay. And what led you to specialize eventually in couples and relationship?
Yeah, that was a circuitous route, actually, because when you start off as a therapist, you are a generalist. You see everybody, all ages, all problems. You really don't know what you're really going to love and what you're going to be good at. You might have a sense, but and for a long time, I worked with a lot of children, and I did a lot of family counseling, and that was a very rewarding time, but but I realized that that was not my niche. Children usually don't choose to go into therapy. They're made to go into therapy. And I love children, and I don't like working with people who don't want to be, with me, right? They resent being in therapy because mommy or daddy made them. So it was a rewarding time, and I learned a lot from it, but I realized then that my real passion was adults. And over the years, as I had worked with couples, I just, couples, it takes sort of a unique skill to work with couples, because you've got two people with very different perspectives, and you've got to find a way to bring them together and be able to hear each other. But I just felt really challenged by that. And when I had a couple who would have a breakthrough, it was just so energizing and exciting to watch. And I realized over time that was where I found my greatest sort of like reward in doing what I was doing, is to see relationships flourish. Now, I work with a lot of individuals because you can't always get both people to the table, so to speak.
Mm-hmm.
But I always tell people, don't wait for your partner to agree to go to therapy, because there are so many things that we can do to change the relationship by you working on yourself.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Right, because every action has a reaction. If you change your action,
Absolutely.
the reaction of your partner is
Yeah.
going to be different.
Yeah. I always say, think of yourself as a cog in a wheel, and you're just one cog. There's other cogs, and the wheel is moving in a certain direction. And when you, as that one individual cog, says, I don't want to turn in that direction anymore, it takes a while to slow that process down, to slow that wheel down, and then start moving in the other direction. But that's what happens when you start to make individual changes. It impacts your partner, it impacts the relationship, and they can't just ignore those changes. They have to respond to them.
Mm-hmm. When would you say is a good sign that a couple needs to go to therapy?
I'm so glad you asked me that question, Marisa. Research says that most couples wait 6 years too long to go to therapy. And I agree with research. I just did a post today on this. A lot of times what I end up working with are what I call the cliffhangers, the marriages that have gotten right to the cliff edge, and they're dangling over, and it's their fingernails, they're barely hanging on, before the marriage crashes and burns. And that is not the best time to go to therapy. The reason, as you know, Marisa, is because by the time the marriage gets to that point, one, or for sure one, if not both, have already mentally packed their bags. And it's often the woman, and so much of the time what I see is that when the woman is finally done, the relationship switch has been flipped off in her brain. And that's when the man says, well, let's go to therapy, right? And maybe she's asked for this for years, and he said, no, we don't need that. But now that she's saying she's done, he's ready to do it. Sometimes, it's the other way around. Sometimes both are willing. But when you're dangling off that cliff edge, that's really the hardest. You've made my job really hard.
Yeah.
So the best time to go to couples therapy is when you begin to see that there are just some things popping up in the relationship that bother you a little. And think of them as weeds in a garden. I like to use this metaphor. You've done all this hard work in your relationship to plant this beautiful garden, but the weeds pop up pretty quickly. And when they are small, they are easy to pluck out. So that's the best time to go to therapy. You're walking through that marital garden and you're going, we're on our phones a little too much, or we don't seem to talk over, we're we're kind of passing each other, through the day, and we're not connecting as much. And I still love you, and I know you still love me, but I think we need to do something about this, or, oh, we're arguing a little bit more. We're fighting over money, or what's going on with that? When you start to see those things, that's the time to go, maybe we need a little professional help so that we don't get stuck in this communication rut, that we're starting to see emerge.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. I love those analogies of the cliffhanger versus pulling a weed out of a garden when it's easy to pull it.
The metaphor queen, and I use my metaphors liberally, and I mix them up all the time. But I'm always looking for ways to help people connect. I don't like to use a lot of clinical jargon. I'm not, sometimes my colleagues, they're always throwing these clinical terms out, and I don't like to do that at all, because I don't think the average person relates to that. So I'm always looking for metaphors to help people go, oh yeah, that makes sense.
Yeah. So once they've decided to go to you, let's say they just have some weeds in their garden.
Yeah.
What is your approach? How do you get them to pull out those weeds and to grow closer?
Yeah. I know when a couple is going to be successful or not, pretty quickly. And that I determine that by how willing each person is to really look inwards. If they're just using the space to vent about their partner, to complain, that doesn't bode well for the marriage. So that's one of the first things I want to assess is, are you just complaining? Do you recognize that there are things about you that have contributed to the state of your marriage or not? And I'm one of these therapists, there are therapists out there who they only do couples therapy, or they only work with individuals. I do both. Like when I work with people, I don't follow sort of the traditional method, and I don't bill insurance. I have, an intensive marriage recovery program, and it's a 6-month program minimum. If we meet every week, it takes 6 months to complete. If we space it out a little bit, then it's going to go beyond 6 months. And that's not a bad thing, because you didn't get to where you are overnight, and we're not going to fix it overnight, right? But the one of the very first things I tell everybody, I tell a couple, is each of you have contributed to this problem, and each of you has responsibility for fixing it. And I am not here to take sides. Women do lots of things to screw up their relationships. So I'm not like go, I'm not all about go women, I'm not going to bash on the guy at all. And I think men need to hear that. I think there's already this stigma about getting therapy for men. And I think there's this double whammy of like a female therapist is going to take, my partner's side. And I want it to be very clear to both of them that that's not the case. And so we're going to do some extensive sort of interviewing to find out what's really going on. And I'm going to get a pretty clear picture at that point of what she thinks is going on versus what he thinks. And then the three of us are going to we're going to create a blueprint of what they want this marriage to look like. And then from that blueprint, we begin to decide how to use the next 6 months. And some of that is going to be working with him individually. Some of that's going to be working with her individually, because they need to feel safe to open up and say things in front of me that their partner doesn't need to hear right now. And then, of course, obviously, some of those sessions are going to be together. So, yeah.
What if you notice that one partner isn't doing their part and isn't willing to look at themselves or to make a change for the benefit of the relationship? How do you avoid taking sides in that case?
I think the way that I avoid taking sides is, I'm always trying to put myself in my client's shoes and look at it from their perspective. And there are reasons for that. If somebody has shut down and they're not communicating, they're stonewalling, or they're just, I want to sort of dig down a little bit deeper. I want to know why that's going on, not just react to that. So I don't blame or shame, but that's an opportunity for me to meet with that person individually and talk about what's really going on. Like, what are they afraid of? Do they just not believe this process is going to work? Why is that? Have they done this before and it didn't work? And that's a lot of the time what I do here, right? Like, we've done this before, they change for a short time and then they don't change permanently. So I don't really believe that this is going to work. So we just simply talk about the consequences of that. My job isn't to fix them. My job is to give them the tools to help them fix themselves. So if one of them is resistant to that, then we talk about what that's going to lead to. And then that choice is on them.
Do you ever feel like it's, when you're counseling a couple, like it's best if they separate? And what are the signs that it's kind of not going to work, and they, for the good of them both, they need to separate?
There are two. I always say there's two kinds of separation. Okay. There's number one, the kind of separation where we both really want to fight for this marriage, but the way we're talking to each other and the way we're treating each other is causing so much damage, and we don't know how to break out of that right now it's best that we don't live under the same roof. Or if you can't financially do that, a lot of people, they resist that idea, so they might move to another bedroom. But if it's feasible for them to move out for a temporary period of time, and we're still working, we're still in the program, we're still, because I give a lot of assignments. So there's specific things that I have my couples do outside of the session. So they're still willing to do that. They're still willing to come together and, whether it's once or twice a week and have like a date night, and they're doing their homework. They're still very much invested in working the relationship, but they just need to stop the dysfunction that's happening until we can apply some of these tools and they start to work. But then there's a second kind of separation, which is, I really want a divorce, but I don't want to say that right now. So I want to separate and act like I'm going to work on this relationship. But now that I'm out, I'm never going back. Okay. So, and that, and a lot of times when I work with people and I say, look, you need to decide if you want to separate but still work on the relationship. People will say to me, if I leave, I'm done, right? So in their mind, a separation is tantamount to divorce. It doesn't have to be. I've worked with a number of couples over the years who did step away from each other, literally moved out, but came back together and are functioning and doing well now. But so really, there's a lot of circumstances in that decision. But so, yeah, it really depends. And I think you're asking me, how do we know when it's really over? Is that really what you're asking me?
Or when it's not in the best interest of one or both parties to continue in the relationship.
Yeah. So that's never something that I tell my clients, right? Unless the exception would be that if I start working with people that I begin to recognize there's like some significant abuse going on here, then that's very different. Now I'm having a very different conversation with the person who's on the receiving end of that. But most marriages don't end because of abuse. Most marriages end because we grow apart. We drift apart.
Let's talk about that. Let's talk about this phenomenon that everyone's heard of, couples they were very much in love when they first met, and then over time they grow apart. is that we know that when that happens, you can help them come back together. But is the
Absolutely.
growing apart avoidable in the first place? And what are some tips you can give to avoid that growing apart?
Well, it's nothing exciting or fancy.
That's
Everybody
okay, as
wants
long as it works.
everybody wants the exciting and fancy, or they want the magic wand solution. And I'm just fresh out of magic wands. I really, are you familiar with the book Atomic Habits by James Clear?
Yes.
Yeah, I love that book. It's his 1% rule that he talks about in the book. It's the small daily intentional things that we do to connect with our spouse. I went through a divorce myself and I'm remarried now, and what a fundamentally different marriage I have this time around. But I came into this marriage very, very intentional about what I wanted to do differently, about how I wanted to show up differently in this marriage, who I wanted to be. And Jeff and I, we talk a lot about not sweating the small stuff. When we get married, when we're young, we make a mountain out of the tiniest little things, right? And if we could only realize how insignificant those things are in the big scheme of things, but we get into the biggest fights over them, and it's really just kind of silly. So it's that 1%, not the big shifts, but the daily, how do I show up in this marriage to let my partner know that I'm thinking about him or her, that I care about them, that they matter, that they're my priority, that they're worth me setting my phone down. They're worth me turning the TV off. They're worth me stopping, shutting my laptop down and going and spending some time. And even if it's 10 minutes every single day, as opposed to like an hour, if you have an hour, great, but 10 minutes of intentional connection, not just, hey, can you pass me the butter? Or, what are we having for dinner? Or, how was your day, while you're, scrolling through social media and your partner's going to, clearly they don't really care. Not that kind of connection, but the putting things down and eye contact, you matter kind of connection. Jeff and I, we have two different habits. When we have access to a pool, we, at the end of each workday, we're in that pool. Now, we don't have one right now, but we used to live in Florida and we lived in an HOA with a community pool. And we were at that pool every evening, Monday through Friday, we're at that pool. Now, the way we do it is we go for walks. And I know you and Brian do this because Brian told me we go for walks and I leave my phone in the car. Right. I might take it in the car, but I leave it in the car. So when we're walking, we're holding hands. We're not distracted by anything. This is my husband's opportunity to talk about what's going on in the world, which he loves to do. This is my opportunity to get my soundbite of news because I don't watch the news.
Oh, we have that in common. I use Brian as a news filter.
I would say, Jeff, okay, honey, give me my news soundbite today. And usually that's when we're on our walks. Mm-hmm. But that is our time to connect intentionally. Yeah.
Exactly. I'm a firm believer in quality time, whatever form that takes, whether it's walks, going to shows, traveling together.
Yeah.
Or how important have you found shared interests? Is it very important that the couple have interests in common, or as long as they support each other in their individual interests, that's enough?
Even more important than shared interests is shared values, because our decision making comes out of our value system. So if you don't have the same core values, then you're going to fundamentally disagree on the most important things in life. It's nice to have shared interests. I think that makes life easier. But if you are mature, then you are welcoming, your husband's interests or your wife's interests, and making equal time for their interests. Oh, I'll give you a perfect example. Right before, you and I got on today, Jeff sat down with me and we watched a show, and he is not a TV person. He did that for me. He's making time for me to have that sort of, hey, will you come watch this show with me? And it's a show I only watch with him. So we don't watch it very often because, he's not into that as much, but he makes time for me. And same thing for me with him and his, world news, global politics, all of that. I listen to that because I know that's important to him. So maturity in a relationship says, hey, we don't have to necessarily like the same things, but we do need to make space for each other's interests.
Oh, I totally agree. I'm always dragging Brian to museums, and I know it's not his first choice of activity, but he comes along anyway, keeps an open mind.
Yeah. When you love your partner, you love seeing them be happy. And so why would you not want to do the things that make them happy? Jeff loves seeing me he likes watching me come alive when I'm doing something that I really enjoy, and vice versa. Now we have a lot of shared interests, but yeah, I don't know that you're ever going to find somebody who matches you 100% in shared interests.
Nor would you want that, because then what new are they bringing to the relationship?
That's different and unique, right? Oh, and challenges you to expand your world, right? And try new things.
Exactly. So I found that walking is a great way to talk about things that may be somewhat controversial or uncomfortable to discuss, because there's less pressure on each other, because you're not because you've got distractions and you're somehow when you're in motion. What other insights do you have about addressing conflict, and what's the best time? What's the best place?
Yeah. Well, so there's not a simple answer to that, but I do say there are some fighting fair rules that the couples should follow. Be really aware. You want to be problem focused, not person focused when you're having conflict. And so what do I mean by that? Well, we tend to use the words you, always, never, and why. Why do you always leave your clothes on the floor? Why do you never listen to me? Right? And of course, the moment you use those words, your partner's going to feel attacked, right? They're going to feel blamed, because that's essentially what's happening. So I teach couples to take the you out of it and make it a we problem. So if you have a problem with something your partner's doing, how can you express it in a way that says, hey, we both have ownership for this problem? Maybe my part in this problem is that I haven't expressed why this is important to me yet, or in a way that you can really hear. Maybe I haven't communicated effectively. Maybe I haven't really told you what I really want and need, in a way that resonates with you. So that's my part. And your part is, whatever your part is. And how can we address this? The moment you shift from you to we, your partner hears that in a different way. So that's one of the fighting fair rules that I talk about in my program. There's a handful of others in terms of there's levels of intensity in an argument, right? So when it's a full blown out fight, that's the worst possible time to be trying to think of a solution, right? You're just going into, blaming and attacking mode. So there's a time to stay in a conversation. There's a time to step away from a conversation. And then what you do in that interim time is really, really key. Some people are like, oh, phew, we're not talking about this anymore. If I just wait 24, 48 hours, this will die down and we'll never have to talk about it again. But that's not useful either. And there's always, in any relationship, there's the person who doesn't want to fight, and there's the person who's like, by golly, we are going to talk. Don't you leave this room. Don't you dare walk away from this conversation. You need to stay right here. We need to figure this out. There's always usually one of both, right? So how do you work around that? How do you work around the person who, needs time to think and process what's really going on inside of them? And they feel sort of that deer in the headlights feeling like, oh, you're coming at me. And they can't. engage in the conversation in that moment versus the person who's very articulate and they are using that to sort of pound their message, out and, you will listen to me and I am right. So there's different communication styles that play into this too.
Which begs the question, is there ever a point where you should just let something go because you've over processed it or you just want to move on? Or will that thing that's bothering you, if you don't address it, just get bigger?
Yeah, it really depends. I always, I have people ask themselves 3 questions. Is this something that I can change? Is this something that I can accept? Or is this something that I need to let go of? So there's a process for each of those 3 things. So it depends on what it is.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, we might be making a really big deal out of something that isn't a big deal, or it is a big deal and it's going to lead to a much bigger problem if it doesn't get resolved. But the way that we're handling it is making it worse. Or we might be hammering away at something that we can't change about our partner. So we either have to accept it or now what? You leave the relationship. So it really depends. There's no one size fits all method to every situation.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Well, Debbie, I understand why everyone wanted to talk to you when you were younger.
Well, I was a kid back then. I didn't know any of this.
You're so easy to talk to, and just full of so many great insights. And it sounds like what you have to offer couples is amazing. So, is there anything else you wanted to share with our audience about if they're in a relationship that feels stuck or distant and they don't want to give up? Is there something you wanted to share with them other than, taking advantage of your service?
Sure.
What's the first thing they can do?
Well, no matter what you do, you need to realize that you cannot change your partner. So the only thing that does work is for you to shift your perspective, right? And if you have a partner who is checked out mentally, emotionally, physically, but you don't want to leave, and there are lots of reasons to still stay, especially if you have children. What I say is work on you, work on building a life that you still love showing up for. Because you're in a season and seasons change. You're in a season right now in your marriage that will pass. I don't know what the next season will be for you, but if you stop attaching your happiness to your spouse and you start focusing on finding that inner contentment that comes from your own frame of mind, the way that you show up each day and look at life, that will have a positive effect on your marriage. It may not happen overnight. It may take some time, but when you take the focus off what you want and need your partner to do differently, and you start looking at you and what you have the ability to change, the change will shift in your relationship.
Amazing. That's so beautifully said. And it sounds like it will lead to a season of sunshine.
Yeah, I've seen it happen, Marisa. I've seen, not only that, I've seen the other partner then go, you're different. You're acting different. I like it. I want to talk to I want to talk to your therapist. I want to be a part of this. So you just never know what working on you can ultimately lead to.
Thank you so much, Debbie. This has been so helpful and interesting.
Thanks for having me, Marisa.
How can our guests get in touch with you if they would like to learn more about your counseling?
Sure. So the best way to reach me is just to go to my website, debbiecottle.com, and my phone number's there. You can email me and we can set up a free call, and I can walk you through exactly what my marriage recovery program is all about. It's called Marriage in Bloom, based on the whole garden metaphor. And yeah, we just go from there, debbiecottle.com.
Well, thank you so much again, and best of luck with your practice. You're rekindling love, and love is contagious. So I'm sure the love that you're encouraging between couples is radiating out from there. So you're making the world a much better place.
Thanks, Marisa. And thank you very much for having me on your podcast. This has been great.
My pleasure.
Thank you for listening to The Turnaround Artists. We hope you got some helpful insights into how to make a tough situation better. If you have a turnaround story you'd like to share with us, send an email to hello@theturnaroundartist.org. Tune in next week and be sure to follow and like us on your favorite podcast platform. In the meantime, keep turning things around.